It's time to turn a board. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today, I'm going to turn a board. Well, probably not this whole thing, but I'm going to turn a section of this. This is German white oak. I got this piece from Sid. Thank you, Sid. He was using this on a large project. He had some boards left over and shared one with me. And I think I'm going to turn something interesting out of this. The wood looks really cool. It's a little bit weathered and it's got a lot of character to it. So I think we can do something pretty interesting. I've got a good idea of what I want to do with this piece of wood. And this could be a great beginner wood turning project. It's not going to be too complicated, but it will have a really interesting, cool, elegant appearance when it's done. So let's dive in and get started.
This board has some cracks on the end, so I obviously want to avoid those. So I'm going to make sure I'm avoiding those on both ends. There's a smaller one on this side we want to stay away from. Now I'm going to use my square so I get a really good 90-degree cut here. I am going to be creating a square board that we're going to be turning. So I'm going to cut this end off first, get rid of that damaged material so that I've got a good square starting point to work from. You want to take your time here and just work through the board slowly. Don't try to force the blade through it all at once. It's a lot of material. This piece is about 2 inches thick, a little more than 2 inches, or about 5 centimeters thick. It's not ideal for turning. Usually when I'm doing boards and that, you really want the wood to be a lot thicker. But if this is all you have, this is a great project to start with. Now measuring the width of this and making sure that's consistent across, and then I'm going to mark that. I like to mark with my X-Acto blade, especially with a rough material like this. You try to mark that with a pencil and it won't show up very well. But if you mark it with an X-Acto knife, it makes a nice clean cut. So I'm measuring and marking the width to match or the length rather, to match the width. And I'm going to use my square again, and I'm going to scribe a line using that knife. Now I'm going to remove the material to the right of this scribed line. I'm not going to cut with that scribed line centered. I want it to be, the blade is going to be on the right side of that. So I'll have a nice square piece of material when this is done. Now I'm going to check this and measure the angles across the corners, and those should match. That's a good indication that this piece is perfectly square, and it is. So I'm going to line this up, and I'm going to make sure I'm cutting on the right side of that scribed line. And I'm just going to slowly work my way through this material. Again, take your time here. Don't get too aggressive with it. Let the blade just do a little bit of cutting each time. Okay, we're getting really close there. All right, so there's our square piece. This is looking really good. I'm going to mark the center. Again, using that scribe, I'm going to mark the center on each side of this board. I'm just measuring across the corners, just lining up a nice straight edge there, and marking an area roughly in the center, and then matching it by marking the opposite corners. That'll get me lined up with the center, and we'll do that on the other side as well. This way I know that when I mount it on the lathe, it's going to be balanced and centered perfectly. All right, let's get over to the lathe with this piece. I'm going to mount this to the lathe using a faceplate initially, and I need to check and make sure. The other thing too is I got to look at these curved rings. I want to cut down through the curves here. This is going to make a much more interesting bowl, as you will see. If I cut the other way with the curves pointing downward, it wouldn't be as interesting. I also want to check the length of my screws. All right, they're going to hold really well, and I still have plenty of room underneath for my recessed mortise. I'm going to use a recessed mortise here, which you guys don't get to see me do very often. So I'm going to eyeball the faceplate just by looking straight down on it to that little cross that I made in the center. I'm going to make sure that's centered. I'm going to start the first screw, but I don't put that all the way in. If you tighten that, you're going to torque the faceplate and rotate it a little bit. So instead, I'll get it pretty much started and then do another location, then come back and tighten that first one. And then I'll continue around and put screws in each one of the holes. The rule of thumb with the screws is you want a screw that's relatively snug to the hole on the faceplate and has about 7 threads exposed underneath into the wood. All right, so we're going to get this mounted on the lathe. Now, I'm looking at the bottom of this piece, so I want to, first of all, I'm going to take a measurement. I'm going to use the width of my 4-jaw chuck, but a little bit larger. So I'm going to set my dividers to that size, and then I'm going to scribe in line. Remember, I'm only scribing with the left side, not the right side. If the right side touches, it's going to flip those dividers around and it becomes pretty dangerous. There you can see the scribed circle that I've created. Now I need to make a recessed mortise that's inside that circle. So I'm going to remove some material with my 1/2" 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge first. I'm only going to go down a little ways. I don't want this to be very deep because the deeper I make this portion, the less depth I can add to the bowl on the other side. So I want to remove just as little amount of material as possible. I'm making a push cut going back into where the recess is. Now I'm going to use my scraper here. This scraper is designed intentionally for making recessed dovetail jaw shape. And that's a space that's needed for the dovetail jaws and for the head or the top of the jaws to set into and then expand into. So you can see we have the size just right, and I'm checking to see how well this is going to hold. There's a lot of loose material on the surface of this wood I need to be careful with. I think it's pretty good, but I want to go just a little bit deeper with this. So I'm going to scrape down that sidewall. Now this scraper, which I'll put a link to this in the description below with all of the other tools that I use for this turning. But this scraper essentially creates the angle for the dovetail, which is about an 11-degree angle. And it does the flat top where the top of the jaws sit, which is really important. So I'm going to go back to my 1/2" bowl gouge, and I'm going to take my time and make a really smooth interior flat bottom for this recessed mortise. But again, I'm keeping this as shallow as possible. I don't want this to be very deep. Now I'm checking the depth of the mortise and the width of the wood. And I'm calculating that if I make the bowl about 1 3/4 of an inch deep or about 4.5 centimeters, I should be fine. If I go deeper than that, then I probably will be cutting into that mortise. So I'm going to set a piece of tape at the 1 3/4 depth on this drill, and then we'll come back to that in just a little bit. All right, so I'm done creating the recessed mortise. Now I need to take the faceplate off. Yeah, and I'm using my impact driver with this. I do not use a drill driver. The impact driver is far superior. If you haven't used an impact driver, go from a drill driver to an impact driver is quite an upgrade, and it's well worth the investment. So I'm going to put my dovetail jaw on my dovetail chuck on the lathe, and then mount this piece. And I'm going to put my Jacob's chuck into the tailstock and put this drill in here. Now what this is going to do is going to give me the depth gauge, so I'll know how deep I can go right off the bat, so I don't accidentally go too deep while I'm creating this, or worse, I don't make it deep enough, it's too shallow. So this is going to give me enough depth, and it's going to give me just enough space between the bottom of the bowl and the top of the recessed mortise. So I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to back this out. So now we have a depth gauge or a marker for the depth of the bowl that's been established. Now I'm going to also take my dividers, and if you have dividers that will open really wide like these, and again I'll have a description or link to these in the description below, I'm going to go ahead and scribe where this outer circle of the bowl is going to appear, and I'm going to get that marked onto the bowl so I know where I'm going to be cutting. So I'm going to be basically making a circle shape inside of a square. It's not as easy to follow as it would be for turning a regular bowl, where at this point we would have the outside of the bowl established, so we could essentially just create the inside of the bowl. Instead we have this odd square that's going around, it's going to be a little different. So I'm using my 5/8 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge initially to just rough out some material. The interesting thing here is those corners are coming by with the square blank, which of course you really need to be careful with. They can whack you really good, but they're moving a lot of air. So it's somewhat unnerving because you have like this, you can feel the breeze coming off those corners on my arm. I can feel it. And it's making me a little nervous that I'm getting too close, but it actually creates quite a bit of wind from the rotation and those side corners flying by. So I'm going to start establishing the curve of the bowl from the outside rim down to the center. A couple of things I'm noticing about this wood is that it has a lot of external moisture, not internal moisture like would be stored inside of a raw tree. This wood has most likely been kiln dried for woodworking, but it's been stored somewhere where it's wet, and that's a little bit problematic. I like to get that dry, and I'm also noticing that it's this really plain kind of beige sand color evenly, so it's not very dynamic. So guess what? We're going to use fire to change that. And this fire is interesting because it's going to do two different things. First of all, we're going to darken the top square portion of this bowl by using flame. And at the same time, it's going to be drying some of the moisture that's on the surface of this wood. And it's going to help dry that out, but it's going to create a contrast for us. I'm going to leave the inside of the bowl the natural color, but I'm going to darken this outer perimeter. Now, when you do this, couple things. Obviously, be very cautious. Make sure your shop is clean. Make sure you have no oil laying around or rags or even shavings. You want to clean up all your shavings so that nothing accidentally ignites. And you want to work slowly. As you can see here, I'm only browning a little bit of an area or darkening an area and then moving on to another one. I'm not at any point trying to burn one area completely. Just working slowly, just work around the piece and it will darken up. Now the other thing is I'm going to apply linseed oil to this piece when it's done. And this is tried and true linseed oil. I don't make it. I'll have a link to it in the description below. You can check that out. But that linseed oil is going to take the soot or the excess charred areas of this wood and it's going to make it even darker. So where you see the little light areas in between the dark areas, that's going to darken up quite a bit more when the linseed oil is applied. This is giving me a really nice contrast between the outside of the square and the inside where the bowl is. Now you can see the difference between the two. Before I really wasn't happy with how just tan it was looking, so this helps add some contrast. I'm going to sharpen my 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. This is my 1/2 inch bowl gouge. I'm going to get that nice and cleaned up so we can make some really crisp cuts for the inside of the bowl here. Now sharpening is super important. You need to be going back to your sharpening station every time your tool even feels slightly underperforming. As soon as you feel anything that's not working, if you're actually adding extra force or that, you really want to get over there and sharpen your tools. I've got an online course all about tool sharpening and tool shaping. If you're interested in having a 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge like mine, you can start with any ordinary bowl gouge and shape it to this shape. And I'll show you how to do that in that course. So check that out. Okay, so now back at the bowl, I'm liking that contrast a lot. Now, if you notice too, I did not get all the way to the outer scribed line that I had intended for that bowl. I wanted to make sure that I could cut away some of that charred material on the outside edge of that bowl. So I'm going to keep working the curve down inside the interior of this bowl. I'm going to start right at that edge and just lightly make a concave arc that goes down to the bottom or to the center of this. Now I'm being cautious not to get too aggressive here and make too deep of a cut because I don't want to overshoot. If I overshoot this, I'm going to be going through the bottom of the bowl and that recessed mortise, and I'll be making a funnel essentially, and I don't want that. So take your time, work a little bit of material. Now, remember, the shape of the interior of the bowl should be concave throughout, right across the center bottom. At no point should there be a little bump or a flat area. So it should be this nice continuous curve. So I'm going to take a break here and just, okay, it's a little, I've still got plenty of depth there. I'm going to clean up the edge of the bowl. This is a great way to just ride that bevel, take your time, let the tool do the cutting. You can see here I've let it flatten out a little bit. I want to make sure I'm not getting too aggressive with the depth of this. I'm making it flat kind of, or this section is kind of flat here. Just being cautious that I don't come up on the bottom of that hole too quickly. I think I need to get something a little more precise than sticking the bowl gouge in there. It doesn't really fit, and I think I'm going to grab one of the faceplate screws and check the depth of this hole. All right, we still have plenty of depth to go, so that's great. So you can see I've got the outside rim pretty much established. I'm not going to make this bowl wider at the top. So if you notice, what I was doing is rubbing the bevel right here, barely making a cut, and gradually increase the depth of the cut towards the bottom of the bowl. So here you can see the increase in the depth of the cut. But up here I'm just rubbing and just very lightly picking up the cut and then increasing as we go down. That's going to increase the curve or the depth of the concave portion of this bottom of the bowl. Just rub that bevel and then you just gently raise the handle of the tool so that the cutting edge engages. Still not seeing any indication of the bottom of that hole. Let's check one more time. Okay, so there's still a bit left. So I'm going to make really clean cuts. I've already went back to the sharpening station again, and no need to show you guys that over and over again, but go back, especially when you get towards the end of your final passes. You want those last few passes to be made with a very sharp tool, so you're getting a really clean cut. That also makes it a lot less sanding for you to have to do at the end. Go nice and slow down your pace so that the tool is doing all the work and making nice clean cuts. That leaves that surface really smooth. There you can see the inside bottom of that hole, and that's from the pointed shape of the drill bit that we used. So make this light cut. I'm pulling all those together. You can see I'm actually cutting almost on the left side of the bowl gouge, and then the cut moves around to the front of the bowl gouge. You want to slow down to the center so that the tool doesn't rip out the material in the middle. And I also like to close the flute right at the very end. You can see how I'm turning it, rotating to the 3 o'clock position. We still have a little divot there. We could probably sand that out, but it's better to make that cut and just smooth that whole piece out. So again, rubbing the bevel, picking up the cut very lightly. We're going to make this just a little bit deeper. I'm going to rotate the handle so that I'm closing the flute right on that last section, and slow the pace down, let the tool do the cutting right there. All right, very nice. Look at this. There's yellow spalt in there. There's some white rot spalt, and there's a little bit of black line spalt. It's just a beautiful piece of wood. Oak is always interesting. So I'm going to take some time to sand this up. I'm just sanding the cut material. I'm going to sand the inside bowl, and I'm going to sand those edges as well. There's some little burn marks that were on those edges. So now I'm going to apply tried and true Danish oil, which is actually pure linseed oil. This is boiled linseed oil that's boiled the way it's been done for hundreds of years. It does not match all of the other linseed oil labeled or Danish oil labeled products in the store. This is actually boiled and cooled without using any metals or chemicals. So it is actually a very pure product. And the company name is Tried and True. I've got a link for this product in the description below as well. So now I'm taking my time and I'm applying the linseed oil or Danish oil to the charred areas. And look how much darker that makes that. And it's just that little bit of charred material being liquefied by the oil and turning into almost like a dye. Actually, India ink, which is very black, is made from charcoal and charcoal dust. It's a shellac and charcoal dust and a couple other ingredients, but essentially they're using the same compounds, and you can see how dark that appears. So we got a really nice contrast. I am very pleased with this. I didn't think the charring would make that much of a difference. Look at this wood, absolutely gorgeous. The contrast is phenomenal. And there you can see the end grain and the direction that we made the cut. If we had made the cut the other side, you would not see those oval concentric rings inside. You would see a different shape if we had flipped this piece over. I am really happy with that. I think this turned out very nice. And this is a great beginner project. Look at that spalt. If you've got some boards laying around, try this project out.
Here it is. I think it turned out pretty cool. The big key to take away from this is use contrast to make your pieces more interesting. Now, what kind of contrast are we talking about? Well, any kind of contrast. What are we using here? We have a circle against a square. It's pretty serious contrast there. We have dark against light, also contrast, and it makes it pretty interesting. The other thing to take away from this is the grain direction when you're cutting down into a flat piece like this. Even if it's a larger bulb length, you can see the pattern that this particular direction created. What's nice about this particular square bowl is you still have the side grain, so you can kind of use this as a reference. You can come back and look at this piece and go, oh wait, I see the rings are going up like that, and when we cut through them and make a bowl, we start getting these really cool concentric rings or ovals inside the bowl. If we had flipped it this way and cut in this direction, the top portion, we wouldn't have the same circles and shapes that we have in there. So that's a fun little takeaway from this as well. All in all, it's very cool. If you have a relatively thin piece of wood, now this is about 2 inches or 5 centimeters wide, so it's not very thick. You just want to be really careful that you don't go all the way through to your mortise on the bottom, and make that mortise as thin as possible. Remember, you can test it with the chuck ahead of time to see if it's gripping really tight. See if you can work that chuck loose. If you can move it around at all or make it loose, then you want to make that mortise a little bit deeper. But the mortise, the recessed mortise on the back of the bowl does not have to be that deep to get a good grip. And that's because we're using the dovetail jaws. Remember, try to use dovetail jaws whenever possible. You're just going to get a superior grip, whether it's a recessed mortise or a tenon. So keep that in mind. But all in all, it's pretty cool. This is oak, German white oak, and there's some great spalt and color and things going on in there. And it's a fun little piece, and this is a really good project if you're just getting started out and you have some chunks of wood laying around, maybe not anything big enough to make a really nice big bowl with, but you have some boards laying around. This is a great practice or a great beginner project to work on. And one last thing, if you're going to use fire in your shop, be really careful. Make sure there's nothing flammable around you. Take a few minutes, clean up all your shavings just in case, and just be really cautious if you're going to do that, all right? If you like this video, do me a huge favor and click that like button. Also, be sure you're subscribing and click that bell. That way you'll be notified when new videos come out. Also, check out my website, turnawoodbowl.com. Over there, I've got everything you're going to need to know about turning wood bowls. Plus, I have online courses to help you accelerate all of your wood bowl turning skills. So check it out, turnawoodbowl.com. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, happy turning.